so I don't even have to convince you. Allow me to share with you my third reason. And the first two were it equips you to do the work of God and you grow in the Word. It is essential for encouragement. That was actually the first reason. Second, switch them around. It is essential for encouragement to be connected to one another, to brothers and sisters in this family. And that's not necessarily something we can get with this hour here where you're all kind of sitting in rows looking at me right now. So maybe you can guess what the third one is. But I believe small groups perfectly encapsulate our vision as a church to encourage, equip, and empower believers to fulfill the Great Commission. And so how do small groups empower us? Well, we are with not just the voice of a preacher or a teacher, Sunday school class. We are with one another on Sunday nights. We're sharing our stories. We're being able to see not just an illustration or a story that I tell, but when you're sitting around a group in the living room of 12 people, you're looking at 11 other stories of what God is doing in this community. And that is empowering, not just to hear a theoretical teaching or story that maybe I can apply this to my life, but to talk about what we're actually doing. We can't, in our Sunday morning hour, take time to have everybody just kind of go around and share, like, here's what I'm going through in life. Here's what God is calling me to do that I'm afraid of. Or here's what I'm praying for that God's given me a heart for. We don't have time to share all of those stories. In small group, we do. And that has an ability to empower us by helping us understand we have a place and a purpose in what God is doing here. In our small group, there were people that we prayed for that were not attending church who are here this morning. That's empowerment. That is God using people, His church, to accomplish His purposes on earth. And so that's why I believe, like, if it's possible for you, then you need to sign up. You need to open up that app, sign up. You need to go out here and sign up. We're meeting, the small group leaders are meeting together at Heidi and I's house tonight. And we're just going to talk about, what's coming up this year. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to pray for you. And we're going to pray for some of you that are still on the fence about this. Because maybe it's uncomfortable to go to someone's house. Like, you're just not, you're a bit of an introvert like me. Or, time or even like travel is a challenge. We want to help you accomplish those things. If it's difficult for you to travel, like once it gets dark, and especially once we hit daylight savings, that becomes an issue when you're meeting at 5 or 6 o'clock at night. We want to help you overcome that because we believe that this is an important and valuable ministry in this church. So, I think you should sign up for small groups. My 3-part series. All right. Open up to Galatians chapter 6. Did you know that today is the last sermon in Galatians you will get for quite some time? Excuse me, man? I hope that wasn't sarcasm. Y'all know Matthew, who's not here this morning, I think it was maybe a month ago. We were in, I was hanging out with him during Sunday school, and we were talking about going back in for church, and he asked me if I was going to talk about Galatians. And I said, yeah, we're doing Galatians, Matthew. He said, no more Galatians. Done with Galatians. So Matthew, a month ago, is done with Galatians. I hope that you've been able to hold on. We are going to specifically focus in on the first 3 verses of chapter 6, and we'll, on Wednesday night, we will talk about the remainder of the chapter. So I hope you can be here for Wednesday night. The meal is at 5:30. Bible study is at 6:30. And also there's a kids choir program that started up at 6:15. So they can sing songs on Sunday mornings if you want your kid a part of that. Get them plugged in as well. But let's read the first 3 verses of chapter 6. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. So we're not going to take an incredible amount of time this morning. We're just dealing with these 3 verses, but I want to examine some of the words in this passage that can sometimes throw us off a little bit. And one of them is right there in the beginning. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression. Now, hopefully we understand transgression is sin, it is rebellion against God. But when we read or we hear that word, to be caught in sin or caught in transgression, I think of it in a parental context. I think of, I caught my son hitting his sister, or I caught my daughter in a lie. It's that idea of catching them red-handed. And we sometimes look at this verse in that way, but that's not the power of what's behind the word caught there. It's not talking about you catching them. It's talking about sin catching them. Other words that are used here are ensnared, to be overtaken by, to fall into sin. So just looking at it that way, brothers, if anyone is ensnared or has fallen into or has been overtaken by any transgression, because I think when we look at it kind of maybe with our first thought, that's why the word caught isn't a great translation, because we have another way of thinking about that word. It almost immediately puts us in an adversarial position towards the one who is in the sin. Like, oh, I caught him red-handed. And immediately, I am opposed to the other. That's not the idea here. The idea is that a member of my family has been caught by sin. And so they're not in trouble with me. They are in trouble with sin. And that's deadly. Like, if you're in trouble with me, which there's only 2 people in this world, definitely, who can get in trouble by me. That's only going to last, I don't know, depends on what I did. But it's not going to last forever, right? But if you get caught in sin, that's serious. I think that's the first thing that we can take from this passage, is this idea that sin is a trap. Sin is a snare. Sin is us walking down that narrow path of God's will, this path that He has designed for our life to walk down into. But if we step just 1 foot off that path, our foot can sink into quicksand. That's what sin is. It is deadly perilous to our spiritual life. The American church, in many corners, has suffered from the idea of kind of lowering the significance of sin. And not talking about how incredibly deadly and dangerous it is, not only to your life and your eternity, but to the church. The divisions that it can cause, the image that it gives of Christ in the community, the damage that it can do to relationships in the church. Sin must be destroyed. That's why Jesus said, if your right hand is causing you to sin, cut it off. If your right eye is causing you to sin, gouge it out. I don't think He was literally meaning like we're supposed to be walking around like with no hands and no eyes, just like wandering around. I think He was saying, you got to do everything you can possibly do to stop sin. It's that serious. And it means even sacrificing part of your life, if it's necessary, to remove it. It's that deadly, it's that dangerous. Peter describes it this way in 1 Peter chapter 5. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. Satan, from the very first moments of the birth of the church, was active in pursuing the suffering and destruction of the church. And Peter isn't just talking about in a physical sense here. He himself would give himself up physically to death and suffering for Christ. When he says that Satan is capable of devouring you, he's talking about the spiritual danger that sin presents to your life and to the life of this church. And we have to take it that seriously, not just for ourselves, although we have to, but for our brothers and sisters as well. And so when I see that one of my family members has been caught, has been stuck, deceived by, and has wrapped their life up into a sin. I have to understand the grave danger they have put themselves in. That is the position that we come to our brothers and sisters with. Not like, oh, I caught you, now I'm going to correct you. No, like, I don't want you to be devoured. I want you to live. I want you to keep walking down that narrow road, because that road leads to life. And the one that you're playing with, the one that you're towing the line with a little bit, leads to death and destruction. And everybody else is going to go down that road. We have been given a very narrow pathway. And we are responsible for keeping one another on it. I'm not walking down this road alone. Well, I wouldn't make it. Christ has given us one another so that we can go down that road together. That's the whole idea of Galatians chapter 6. Let's look at it again. Terry, you can put it back up. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Now, I want to focus on the word you who are spiritual. Now, when I was in college, I went to Ozark Christian College. Me and my roommate had these weird ways of talking about people, and we had these classifications. We were not good people. We had these classifications that we would put people in, people we admired, especially like professors. You know, we would refer to like how awesome a professor they were by like saying, oh, that's Archangel Mark Moore, or that's the Apostle Mark, what was the other Mark? Mark Scott. You know, they're archangels or they're apostles. But there was another more cynical designation we would give to some of our fellow students that just got on our nerves. We would call them the super spirituals. Okay? Now these were the people whose righteousness performed before us honestly made us insecure. Because we were like, man, boy, that's a super Christian over there. And I am not that. Like they're the ones who were out there in between classes strumming on their acoustic guitar, singing how great is our God, and I'm just like trying to figure out how I can get out of turning in homework the next hour. It's like, that's super spiritual, dude. I'm not that dude. I don't know, like, and so this term super spiritual was just like, we were cynical, like, obnoxious college freshmen. And sometimes when I read that, I think, well, you who are spiritual, it's this image of Christians who are doing all of the right things, right? It's the ones who have their lives all together. I look at them, and that's a spiritual person. I can gauge that by the outside. But if you were with us last week, you read chapter 5. It's not just about the outside things. A spiritual person in this context is one who is led by the Spirit, who keeps in step with the Spirit. The Spirit is the one calling the shots in their life. And this is essential to know and understand. Because there are a lot of people, maybe even in this room, who you could apply that cynical term super spiritual towards, because they've got it all wrapped up on the outside. They know all of the Christian acts. They know everything Christians do. They know how to be in church and how to show up for projects and how to give. And we know all of the Christian things we're supposed to do. But if you're honest with yourself, you know last week hit hard because you don't actually believe that the Spirit of God is leading you. You've just fallen into a mode of life where I just know these are the right things Christians do, and so I'm doing them. And that's a righteous acts-based life. That's not a Spirit-led life. And so it's essential that we understand who we are when we see our brother or sister caught and ensnared in sin. We need to understand where we are when we go into this process of trying to restore them. Because the super spiritual person, that person who has it all together, but who isn't following the Spirit of God, is going to come at them with the lists of Galatians chapter 5. And they may have all the brokenheartedness in the world for that brother or sister, but they're going to come at it as like, hey, these are the wrong things, and what you're doing is a wrong thing, and you need to start doing these right things. And we start developing lists and action plans, and we never take it to the place where we never went ourselves, which was the Spirit of God has to make you a new creation. He has to make within you a new heart. That's a lot more difficult than the action plans and accountability steps that we can take on the outside to make ourselves look spiritual when we are anything but. I mean, the reality is, can I just be very honest? The reality is, oh, this is way off topic, but man, once I was in a church and I said, can I just be honest with you? And then someone came and complained to me later that when I say that, it means that everything else that I'm saying is a lie. So I just want you to say, when I say that, I'm just emphasizing it. Everything else is true too. Can I just be honest with you? We don't like to have the Spirit have full reign. Some of us have dipped our toe in that pool. We said, okay, God, I don't want to just act the part. I want to be the part. I want to let you have control. Because here's what the Spirit almost always does. He comes in to start cleaning house. And he identifies those dead places in our heart and those sins that we're clinging to. And he says, all right, repent. All right, confess. It's time to start cleaning this mess up. And that is always painful. It is always painful to go to a brother and say, I am caught in sin. I am ensnared. And I need to confess because that's a part of repentance. It's a part of allowing the Spirit of God to heal me. And oftentimes when the Spirit comes in, because we've said, I can't do this by myself. God, I need you to be the one who heals me. I need you to be the one who frees me from these sins in my life. He starts saying these words that are uncomfortable, and we know are going to be painful. And we say, never mind. I'm just going to go back to my list. Because it's a whole lot easier than being honest and exposed before my family. You who are spiritual, who are led by the Spirit, should show that brother or sister what it looks like, not to follow a list, but to be led yourself by the Spirit of God into painful places, uncomfortable places, but places that lead us to healing, true healing. All right, the next phrase. Restore them. That I want to look at is restore them in a spirit of gentleness. And that word there, restore. When I think of restore, it's I always think of HGTV. Anybody else? They have some junked out house, and now it's time to restore the house. And I also thought of Sean, who's got this car in his garage that he's trying to restore. We think about there's this obnoxious person on my Instagram who's always restoring old furniture and showing us how artsy she is. That way cynical and judgmental. Sorry. But it's restoration. It's taking something broken. It's taking something out of date. It's taking something ineffective, and it's putting in the time. It's putting in the energy. It's putting in the sacrifice, the resources, everything it is going to take to bring that product back to what it was originally intended and always supposed to be. And so when we think about the physical things in our life and the purposes they have, if it's a car, well, sometimes that's just something beautiful to look at, to experience, to drive around, to be able to travel from point A to B, but not also when we're restoring old cars. It's to do it in style. It's to do it beautifully. It's to do it because you love the way these old cars were made. If it's a home, you're trying to make it a comfortable place. You're trying to make it a place that a family wants to be, because that's what it was always intended and supposed to be. And that takes work. It takes all of our energy and time and thought and attention to detail. And the same thing is true when we come into the life of a brother or sister caught in sin. It's not just this one moment where I get to say, hey, you bad, not good, stop it. That's not how it works. We are in the process of restoration. That's going to require time, energy, resources, a sacrifice of yourself for their good, to help them return back to what they were always intended to be. What is that? A vessel of God's glory. I mean, all of these words I'm using: time, energy, resources, sacrifice. Here's one word for it: love. That is how we come to our brothers and sisters in sin. With love and compassion. I mean, we immediately receive a warning here, don't we? It says that if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. Earlier it says, you be careful not to be tempted yourself. These are dangerous waters we walk into. I almost said, let's be honest again. I'm going to start getting complex about that. We have to understand when we go into the life of someone who is struggling, a very easy temptation is to start developing a spirit of superiority within ourselves. And well, I'm not struggling with that. And we can start to allow it to prop us up and feel pride when we look at their weakness. And Paul here is saying, hey, you better be careful. Don't start thinking that you are something when you are nothing. Why? Because the very same person may be your salvation in the future. The very same person who you are restoring to a relationship, a right relationship with God, may be the very person who is able to pull you out of the pit later in life. And so we don't do this with pride or conceitedness. We do it with all humility because we know there have been times in life when we needed someone to restore us, to be used by God and by the Spirit of God to correct that course, to get us back onto that narrow path. And so I can never approach from a place of pride in these situations. The other word I want to look at was, and that's why this word is used, a spirit of gentleness. There are people who this comes a little bit more naturally for than others. I don't really feel like I'm one of them. I'm much more into just tell it like it is, and truth has to be stated for what it is. You can't gloss it over or try to make people feel good by not being honest about what's going on. But I'm much more into the scorched earth kind of confrontations. And then some of you can maybe identify with that. We are told to approach in a spirit of gentleness. We are to present to them the fragrance of the Holy Spirit to draw them back into His presence, rather than the wrath of the human spirit, which will only push them away. It says, "And the one who is spiritual knows that the Spirit is calling the shots." And then this last phrase I want to look at, it's right there in verse 2, kind of in the middle of these verses I've been looking at. "Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." And that's the whole idea right there. Sin is a burden. It is a deadly trap. It is a struggle to take yourself out of, even when the Spirit is calling the shots. Because it's going to require pain and sacrifice and suffering and all of these things to extricate ourselves from something that's deadly. And so in every way possible, we are going to bear one another's burdens humbly so that restoration and true healing can happen. I referred to Guthrie Christian Church earlier and Don Reapy. And I don't want to make it clear, I'm not using this illustration to say he was sinning or anything, but this is a great example of how the church is bearing with one another's burdens, of helping one another through suffering. Paul says that is living out the entire law of Christ right there. And if you could just get in it with one another and take care of one another no matter what the cost to yourself, that's the entire law of Christ. In a few weeks, on a Tuesday, there's going to be a pastor's gathering. All the local pastors, generally in central Oklahoma, are going to gather at Cherokee Hills Christian Church. Is that right? This is a program that Gerald Jocelyn does, the Restore ministry that we support. And they just gather all the ministers together. It's a time of worship and encouragement. It's just a good time to be together. And he messaged me last week to kind of prepare us for what he wants to do with Don Reapy. And he's asked Don Reapy to come, and he's going to come and he's going to present what happened and kind of where they're at in the process. And that's all he knows. But what he's done is Gerald has asked all of the other pastors to prepare, a letter of encouragement to him and to the church. And also, everybody's supposed to bring a book or something from our office that we find useful, because everything that Don had from his years of ministry is gone. Even all of the sermons he wrote. So that's the other thing we're supposed to bring. Did he tell you this too?
You don't want none of my stuff.
You better get right. Because we're all supposed to also bring a sermon that we want him to preach. It's just this idea that we're going to bear one another's burdens. And if you're suffering, man, that I'm going to sacrifice for you to alleviate that suffering. I want all of that pain on me, because I want what is good for you. Parents, grandparents, anyone who's loved a little one understands this. When you see your child in pain or sick for some reason, like, I'm sure you have prayed in prayer, like, God, give that to me, like, put it on me. I want this pain right now, because I don't want them going through that. This is what we've been called to do for one another. And when we bear one another's burdens, when we put others before us, when we love our brother and our neighbor as ourselves, then Galatians takes care of itself. All the circumcision stuff, all the law stuff. If you're loving one another, following the Spirit, then you have fulfilled the law of Christ. So that's the key. Look around this room right now. These are a portion of the brothers and sisters of Christ that have been put in your life. And so bear one another's burdens. And part of that means you have to be in their life enough to know what the burdens are. It's really easy to come to church and just say hello, and yeah, it's been a good week, and then bail out the door, so I don't really have to get to know anyone. And when I don't get to know anyone, I don't know what any of their burdens are. What do you mean, their burdens? Well, you gotta love a person enough to know what's going on in their life. For the Spirit to be able to say, hey, okay, this is your moment in their life. Get in there and get your hands dirty. So sign up for small groups. It's Christ's love. It's Christ's love for us that we give to one another. It's as simple as that. And would you be standing this morning? The worship team is coming forward. And if you have burdens that you need to lay down, if you need prayers that need to be prayed for you, if you have a decision to make, we want you to come forward, and we want to be able to love you, to restore you, to do whatever the Spirit of God needs to be done in your life. And whether that is a moment right here this morning before everyone, or it's a moment that we can share later in the week, I want you to follow the Spirit if He's telling you to move, if He's telling you to go, if He's telling you to say help. Would you be singing with us this morning?